He had always wanted to see the stars from a very young age. He was fascinated by them. Maybe it was because of the decoration they had put up in his room from birth. Or it could have been their bedtime stories, and from those he began to wonder what was beyond them, what could be found there. And now, a few years later, one of his prayers had been answered right for his birthday. A telescope just big enough to be able to look at the skies better, to see if there are bits that he had missed before when looking up with his own eyes. Unfortunately, there was a little problem. His parents still hadn't taken the telescope out from its box and took it and him outside to the hill close to them for stargazing. There always seemed to be something in the way for their plans. Be it work, just being tired, friends, the other important plans. So, after a while, the boy knew what he had to do. And so, one night he waited for his parents to go to sleep. He took up the telescope he already had assembled together with his father a while back, when they had many of their plans for its use. But tonight was the night, and what was going to be more special was the fact that he was going to be doing it alone. Even when he had reached his destination, he still was feeling that same nervousness, and he honestly was feeling a little bit afraid. Being all by himself outside in the dark, he had been warned not to do this for many times, and now here he was, outside in the dark, all alone. Something a child like he should not be. But there was that brave part of his brain that just kept reminding him, "You're here now, you planned for this so long, just have a quick look." With shaking hands and taking a long, exhausted breath, he put down the telescope and aimed it right to the night sky, and then he began to look. Quickly that fear and nervousness faded away as he continued to look at the night sky. The stars felt like they were just a little bit closer now. Through the telescope, he could even see the moon's surface just a little better. While the view was not like he had seen from the documentaries and other pieces of media, the fact that he was able to see the sky like this already made all of this worth it. He could just now see that there were much more stars in the sky than he had thought, and somehow he hadn't been able to see them even when the skies were the most clear during the night. But now he saw so much more. It was like seeing a very thin and almost transparent veil for the first time. A few fast-moving satellites gave him a quick fright when they passed over his lens. At first, for a moment, he thought he had seen a shooting star, but saw a few other examples and quickly realized that there were satellites. He honestly felt disappointed when realizing they weren't flying stars as he had thought. But it began to fade when new interest and feeling of excitement began to wash over him as he realized that he had been able to see them at all like this. At times he had to take his eye off the lens just to see the difference without it, and also have a careful look around to make sure he was alone. The passage of time disappeared from his mind when he continued to look at the sky, and then there it was. He was seeing it. A real shooting star. At first he had thought it to be another star, but after a while he had started to notice it was growing. His heart was beating fast, and as the star was getting closer, its pace began to increase. And it was still continuing its journey pretty much towards him. A very scary thought came to his mind, and he did what was the best he could do. Pick up his telescope and just run right back to his home. But not before taking a few more glances upwards, now trying to find it with his naked eyes, and very quickly he found what he was looking for. The star was falling and he had to get out of the way. In his haste, he couldn't set his telescope correctly, and because of it, he soon found himself looking at the ground much closer than before. Looking back in fear, the falling star was now very much visible, moving so much faster than he had realized. Its stop would be coming much sooner than thought, and so all he could do was to brace himself. throwing his hands onto the back of his head, just waiting for the worst. And then it struck. Even through his eyelids, he could see a bright white light taking over the area he was in, and then it just vanished like that. There was a small gust of wind that blew over, but nothing that dramatic ever happened. No great explosion that would have wiped him, the woods, and a little bit more around him. Slowly, he got up, trying to look behind him to see what had just happened. Did the star just somehow vanish? As expected, there was no crater, or even a small hole left. Instead, what he saw was a figure that was levitating just above the ground, slowly lowering itself. His eyes tried to adjust to the darkness, which were treated by a very bright light, trying to see what was before him now. At least one thing was certain, that the figure looked human at least, but that still didn't stop his fearful beats in his chest, as that familiar feeling was still in him. But it was now pinpointing a new subject, a real alien. At any other point he might have been excited and not so frightened, but at this moment already being afraid that his line would be cut short. Even though it wasn't the case, that fear quickly found a new target. And yet his legs didn't dare to move, even though his mind was screaming to run back to his home, slam the door shut, take shelter with his parents, and be ready to face any consequences they might give him. And maybe from there, his current fears would just vanish, and he can just regret his decisions later. The boy again turned to look back to see if his eyes could pick up the figure better, and that he did. The alien was levitating above the ground, looking around. From what he saw, the humanoid form did resemble that of a female. This time he was able to get a better look and could see a few more details better. Now that his eyes were getting used to the darkness again, he now could see that the alien seemed to be wearing some kind of maybe an open dress, or was it more like a robe? Another thing he suddenly saw was the long and dark hair, and from that hair he could see small glimmers like tiny stars and small strands of white on random places on the hair. But what really was shining were the two bright yellow eyes, like two bright stars or suns. Those two orbs were scanning around the area and very soon stopped at the place where the boy was still laying, and now once again frozen by fear. As the alien began to levitate towards him, slowly, while carefully raising its arm. That created a jolt in his head that spread to his whole body, and he jumped up in an instant. His body was already turning away, ready to run. There was something about those two glowing orbs, though, that didn't scream anything dangerous. In fact, they looked at him with great curiosity. And that raised arm, it was now waving at him, very slowly. Maybe also for this alien, it meant hello? With a shaking hand, the boy raised his to wave back. And then he heard the alien, and it was a very happy breath. Now the alien was waving much faster. And also that the alien was much closer to him, the boy was able to see even more details. Like what he had guessed were small pin-like balls on its, or in this case, her hair. A very dark blue hair, almost like the night sky itself, but also the skin was very pale in contrast to her hair. And those yellow eyes had warmth in them that made him feel a lot more at ease, and even trust her. Then there was the smile that had followed the happy sigh, which gave him more reassurance that maybe he wasn't in danger. Hello? He weakly greeted, his hand still waving. All the response he got was another happy gasp, and more faster instead of slow waving. Then there was a very awkward silence between them. What am I supposed to say? The boy panicked. She's from space! I don't think she can speak, or even understand what I say. I still have to show or say something to her. And the only thing that came to his mind was the complete opposite of what his parents always tried to hammer to his brain. Never tell or show any stranger where you live. And what's more stranger than an alien from outer space? So he did just that. The alien followed him, her eyes sparkling from what could simply be happy curiosity. When they were very close to the house, the boy, hoping that the alien understood gestures they used, gave her a sign that asked her to be quiet. He was thankful that he had left a few very dim lights on so they wouldn't just tumble in the dark, possibly waking his parents. That was the last thing he wanted to do in this situation. Glancing back, he saw the alien looking around his house, her hands twitching from the want of touching and feeling everything she saw in the room. But it looked like she was holding herself off from doing that. Guess they also teach that at space school, the boy thought amusingly. The alien was right now looking through the living room and was taken by the photos of him and his family. From there, she couldn't fully control her arm that was raised up. Her hand closed to the framed picture of the family of 3. The look she gave was something the boy couldn't fully put his finger on. Maybe it was some kind of memory, but it also did look somewhat sad. Before the moment might get any sadder, the boy quickly made an audible grunt, catching the alien's attention away from the photo. Seeing him waving at her, telling her to follow him, which she was more than happy to do. Now that he had the alien's attention again, the boy looked behind him, seeing the alien again looking around the house, still that familiar fascination sparkling in her eyes. He again made the sign, asking her to be quiet, but did a few more times so that she would understand that both of them had to be extra quiet. Thankfully, she seemed to have understood by replying with a small nod and smile, following him to the now lit-up kitchen. At that moment, a realization struck him quite hard. Can she even eat anything here? She's an alien! The confusion on his face was quite apparent while trying to figure out if there was any kind of food that he could even share with her. His head looked all around the kitchen, trying to figure out some kind of a solution, but his brain just had its biggest short circuits of its time and was now going through a very slow reboot. The alien saw that her companion was in great distress and carefully tapped his shoulder, smiling at him. And she simply just went for the cabinets, going through anything that might catch her interest. She took out different ingredients and other eatables, feeling them, trying to smell. A few she was trying to open before the boy simply shook his head. And then she came across something very soft. It was wrapped around a very thin layer, but it had something like a small pin around its end, like trying to keep it sealed. The alien looked at the boy again, and all he gave was a very unsure shrug, which was good enough for her. And soon, with a little help from the boy, and once again looking around, smelling and tasting a little different kinds of ingredients, the alien soon found herself lost in new kinds of tastes. She savored every bite from the substance that the boy called bread. For such a simple edible creation, there were so many different kinds of tastes she could enjoy. The alien let out so many sounds of happiness when a new slice of a different kind of toppings were introduced, except for those moments when she discovered something very distasteful for her taste buds, of course. Still, the time she was spending right now was something she had missed a long time, that brought to her memories from a long time ago. Are you alright? The boy asked, when seeing the alien had stopped eating and was just staring at the wall. There was no reaction to his question, so he cleared his throat. Alien blinked, but it still didn't seem like she really reacted to the boy. And then, without warning, she dropped her half-eaten pastry, took the boy's hand, and 2 of them ran outside. What is it? He asked, not sure if she fully understood him still, but he could tell that something was on her mind. When outside, she pointed first at herself before raising her hand, pointing at the night sky above them. before lowering both of her arms to her chest and cupping her hands around each other. The boy tilted his head just slightly, not fully understanding the meaning, so the alien then pointed at his house, then repeating her previous gestures. "Home?" he asked, pointing upwards. "Are you homesick? You want to go back?" He knew she probably couldn't understand him, but he had a feeling that she could still guess what he meant, and she nodded, pointing upwards again. Her hands began to make gestures, but she halted midway. Very short, confused and distressed sounds left her mouth as she tried to convey what she had wanted to tell the young being, but to her dismay, she wasn't able to. So far, both of them had been able to communicate with just very simple gestures, as what they had shared was very simple. But now, here, wanting to explain herself, she found herself to be unable to, and that frustrated her greatly. How could she explain herself to him in a way that he understood her? Her eyes darted from one side to another, her hands were shaking as she tried to find a way to communicate her feelings, but nothing came to her. At that moment, all that really came to her mind was to look at the boy, trying to show him that she was sorry that she wasn't able to just tell him what she wanted to say. To that, the boy simply smiled at her, putting his hand onto her own, giving a gentle squeeze before smiling a bit wider, nodding his head just a little, trying to tell her that it was all right. She let out a shaky breath, calming herself, taking away the distress she was feeling, before flashing her own comforting smile and nodding her head, before moving her head sideways, looking right at the starry sky again, before turning back to him. That he understood, and he nodded, while also feeling bits of sadness growing in him. Both of them shared a sad smile, before letting go of their hands. "I hope I can see you around," he said, knowing that she didn't know what he was saying, but there was the hope that she might just understand what he tried to convey to her. It might have worked as she replied to him, but it came out as full gibberish to him, still not really fully grasping the language of the aliens. The alien then closed her eyes, concentrating on something. A bright aura engulfed the alien, her long hair waved behind her, almost like a pair of wings, ready to take her beyond this world to somewhere very far away. To her own home, maybe. Slowly the alien began to levitate upwards. She moved closer to the boy, who was a little shocked at first. She had raised her hands to her hair, trying to take something from it, then lowered one of her arms, her hand holding something in a tight grip. Gently, she took his hand and placed something small onto his palm, her now shining eyes giving him a very soft look with an equal smile, while he stared at her, completely taken aback, his words, and mind for that matter, failing him. To that, the alien let out a very amused giggle, still smiling at him. Then she waved him her final goodbye and shot upwards like a shooting star itself. And he watched and waited until both the alien and the trail had fully vanished from his view, while wondering how long it will take her to reach her destination. Will she ever reach it? And what she might do then? And most importantly, will she even remember me? From that thought, he felt his eyesight becoming blurry from the tears that were forming in his eyes. He tried to dry them off, but new ones were forming in their place. He then remembered whatever he was still holding tightly in his hand. The present! Carefully, he opened up his fist and gasped. On his hand was a small piece of jewelry, that in a form of a star. A small star that seemed to be glowing its own dim light. While looking at this gift, the tears were now freely falling, but not from the sadness like they originally were to be released. But now they were from happiness and a very good feeling. "I know we will meet again," he whispered, closing his hand around his present, looking up to the skies again. "I will never forget you. I hope you will not either."